Okay, we'll probably get started to give ourselves as much time as possible. Okay, this is our 18th lockdown travel talk. So well done, everyone. You've all been so faithful, and it's been really great. We've had a good time, haven't we? In spite of everything, I'm so grateful to everybody, speakers and people who have joined us. And this morning we've got Nicki Little with us, and she's going to talk to us about her walk with a group of volunteers from LOROS. For those of you who are not in Leicester, LOROS is our local hospice. I'm sure Nicki will explain that. And we are going to do part 1, and we will be breaking the 20 minutes at 10 to 11. So do use the chat to make comments or ask questions, and enjoy. Over to you, Nicki.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. Gosh, it seems like a million years ago, in more ways than one, that we did this walk. I dream of being able to walk even 10 miles out of this zone at the moment, never mind 192 miles across the north of England. So as Trish said, LOROS is the local hospice, the Leicestershire and Rutland Hospice. Like all hospices, it gets some funding, but it has to get the majority of its funding through fundraising. There's the profile of the ups and downs. Not surprisingly, you can see it's much more hilly through the Lake District to start with. So the first few days hillier. So the shorter days were the hillier days. And then you get into the longer days. The second half of the walk were generally, though, not as hilly. And in fact, obviously going down to the coast at the end, a nice slope down to the coast at Robin Hood's Bay at the end. Okay, this is probably Alfred Wainwright's most famous quote about the coast to coast. He's designated the creator of the coast to coast walk. It's not an official path. There are not official signs for the whole of the walk, the coast to coast walk, because I think particularly the Lake District didn't want, hordes and hordes of people all following exactly the same route. So there are some alternative routes, particularly through the Lake Districts, that are part of it, and they don't like to call it an official walk, unlike some of the other West Highland Way or Hadrian's Wall walk or whatever. Anyway, I'm sure most of you have heard of Alfred Wainwright. Was an inveterate walker, particularly in the Lake District, produced lots of very, very interesting books with hand-drawn maps and hand annotations. And so he, quite a grumpy old person, apparently, according to the stories, but he wanted his ashes to be scattered in the Lake District on haystacks or near haystacks. And he said, if you, dear readers, should get a bit of grit on your boots as you're crossing haystacks in the years to come, please treat it with respect. It might be me. I'm not actually sure that is his most famous quote, having said that, because I think the next quotes tend to turn up in any talk about walking or about outdoor activities, namely that there's no such thing as bad weather, only unsuitable clothing. And then the second one's rather more inspiring. You were made to soar, to crash to earth, then to rise and soar again. There's no such thing as bad weather, only unsuitable clothing. Nevertheless, I would contend that the weather that we had was absolutely dreadful. It was Adrian Walker, our leader, confessed that it was the worst weather that they'd ever had on the coast to coast walk up to that point. Since then, they have had one even worse than ours. But you'll see when we get onto the day-to-day reports that the weather most days was wet, not to say absolutely pouring down. We had 2 or 3 days that were okay, but on the whole, it was absolutely dreadful, the weather. And the good thing was, I suppose, that made it feel like more of an achievement when we did complete it. I think if we'd been walking all the time in, quite pleasant weather, it wouldn't have felt like such a challenge. One year, 3 or 4 years ago, they had an incredibly hot experience of walking across, and people were getting blisters from the incredible heat that they experienced. Well, we had, say, cold and wet, and it did turn out that I hadn't got totally suitable clothing, unfortunately, as you will see as we go through. So that was the group that we had setting off. We all convened at LOROS, and we travelled up in that minibus. The great thing about doing these walks with LOROS is that Adrian, who's the man on the extreme right with this short lady standing in front of him, Adrian organises incredibly well these trips. You've got a minibus to carry your big bags and your stuff. He organises all the accommodation, he organises the route, and so on and so on. So you don't have to think about getting your stuff up there. Each day when we finish walking, the minibus picks, unless we're finishing at the youth hostel or wherever we're staying, if you're sort of finishing in the middle of, let's say, nowhere, then the minibus will pick you up and take you back to your accommodation or take you onto your accommodation. And the following day, if you're not starting from the youth hostel or from your accommodation, the minibus takes you back to the place that you finished the previous day, and you set off from there. So it's incredibly useful to have the minibus. Also, if it's possible, it wasn't possible the first few days of our walk, but later on it was possible. The minibus appears at break time or lunchtime. It's lovely to see it. And if you've got a nice driver and a nice driver's mate, they'll have the kettle on and they'll make you cups of tea and cups of coffee, and they'll hand out cake. So much cake was consumed on the walk. It was just phenomenal. Most people brought cakes to share, and I think half the minibus was actually full of cake rather than luggage. I'll take you through the people who were there from left to right. So I'm the gangly one on the extreme left. Next was Mike, who was the minibus driver, and with him his wife Sue in the turquoise short sleeve top. She was supposed to be walking with us, but the poor woman, after about 3 or 4 days, even though she'd done all training walks and done the distance and everything, she developed the most dreadful blisters, absolutely dreadful blisters that got terribly infected. She actually had to go to a clinic with her blisters, and she was told not to carry on walking. So, I mean, in her position, I would have been absolutely gutted. But given that her husband was driving the van, she couldn't really go home. So she stayed on with him, and she became the driver's mate and was very, very generous in, like I said, making cups of tea and coffee for us, fetching newspapers, doing bits of shopping during the day. So that I really felt for her. She did later on one day try to walk again because her daughter and son-in-law turned up to join us for the day. But again, her feet were just in a terrible mess. So felt very, very sorry for her. The next lady with the blue top and the glasses has now become a really good friend of mine, Jean. We've done quite a few walks since then, just the two of us, not fundraising walks, but just the two of us. I think it's fair to say we bonded over gin and tonic and over being the only two who didn't want to go to bed at 9 o'clock in the evening. I could not understand why people wanted to go to bed at 9 o'clock in the evening, however tired you felt. So Jean and I were the two who wanted to stay up a bit later. And once we got to Whitby, where we could choose to share just rooms for two, she and I shared a room so that, as I say, we didn't have to switch the lights off at 9 o'clock. Previously in the youth hostels and so on, so people would all be in bed at 9 o'clock with the lights off, and I'd come crawling in, trying not to wake everybody up at my usual going to bed time of midnight or even later. The next chapter, he was a retired music teacher. The next two ladies had both taught together at Bosworth College, and by sheer fluke, the lady on the right of those two with the white blouse was my teacher tutor when I did my PGCE at Bosworth College back in the 70s. And we hadn't seen each other since then. So it was quite amazing when I turned up to one of the training walks and she said, "Oh, you were a student at Bosworth College, weren't you?" And so it turned out that she'd been my actual tutor looking after me when I was doing my teacher training. The next guy, Brian, with the sort of jerkin over his short sleeve shirt, he was absolutely amazing. He's well into his 70s, not to say his late 70s. He does running still. He does speed walking with his grandson. He was incredibly fit. He was incredibly naive. He'd never spent a night away from his beloved wife before. So he found it quite difficult, I think, to start with, being away from his wife. And we did take the mickey out of him quite a bit. But he was incredibly fit. To my surprise, even though he did all this walking and all this running, his gear, his equipment was dreadful. His waterproofs weren't waterproof. He just wasn't really equipped properly for the walking that we were doing. But he got right across. We all got, apart from Sue, say, who had to become the driver's mate, we did all complete. The next chap in the blue top is Tony. He's ex-army, you can probably tell from the look of him. He did the coast to coast with Adrian something like 2010, 2011. And Adrian immediately spotted him as a useful help, well, more than useful, as actually invaluable right-hand man. So being ex-army, he's very calm, cool, calm, collected. He can just, any situation, I would feel total confidence in him and Adrian. I've only seen Tony panic slightly once. When we were walking, we got to a place called 9 Standards Rig. You're on the top of a hill, big hill, and there's these 9 standing stones. And it was very, very boggy. And we just could not, or Tony just could not find a way down. We'd come without, unless we'd gone down, we went down again the way we'd come up. He had to ask a local, which I think was a big blow to his pride, because he's very, very good on map reading and, say, leading. And then the little lady, the short lady on the right, she's another ex-Bosworth College teacher, actually. So the three of those ex-Bosworth College teachers were very good friends already. They already knew each other. But I didn't really know anybody apart from my ex-tutor and Adrian himself. I'm not sure if Adrian's listening. He was going to join in for this first half, and if he wants to say something and unmute himself, but if he's listening, I said I'd be rude about him, but actually I have to say Adrian on the right is the most patient person I have ever had dealings with in my life. He's very, very efficient organising these walks. He's always good-humoured. He's always patient. I don't know how, sometimes I would just have lost my rag and shout. You know, when you get a sort of a mature woman saying, Adrian, I can't fasten my seatbelt. I say I would just lose my rag, but he manages to stay patient all the time. And he's a great friend, and I'm very grateful to him for all the walks that he's organised. I've been on several since, which I could talk to you about at another juncture if you like. As you can see, it was really nice and sunny when we were going to set off from LOROS in Leicester. I don't think Adrian can be here unless he can't unmute himself. Right, so we set off and we got up to St Bees, the start of the coast to coast. As you can see there, there's a plaque and so on. And as you can see, the weather has already turned cooler, windier, wetter. So we all had to get sort of full sort of waterproof gear on. We all gathered there for our sort of the start of our walk. And the first thing that you have to do before you set off is, well, 2 things you have to do is actually wet your boots in the sea. So we went and sort of got our boots wet. And the other thing that you have to do is to pick up a pebble. The idea being that you put the pebble in your pocket and you walk across, you do the coast to coast, and when you get to the other end, you throw the pebble in the sea at Robin Hood's Bay. So I have images of, in a few, many years' time, perhaps in a century's time, when the poor geologists are trying to work out why on earth there's stone which originated on the west coast of England now turning up on the east coast of England. Obviously, it's a good idea to take a fairly small pebble, so you're not carrying a huge weight, and to put it somewhere where you're not going to forget it and where it's not going to weigh you down either. So we set off lunchtime-ish on the first day, and that's St Bees that you can see in the background, the lovely beach there. And you start off, so there's climbing straight away. You have to go up the coastal path and clamber up to the top of the cliffs there. And you can't really tell from that picture, but it was incredibly windy as we set off. And one person in the group lost their hat in the wind, so that was a good start. But at least it wasn't raining. It was quite fine, and it was quite, apart from climbing up to the top of the cliffs and going along the cliffs, not really too strenuous a day. As you'll have seen it and saw before, and at the top of the slide you can see the first day just 6.5 miles, so quite a sort of gentle let-in. And the first night we actually stayed at this lovely looking youth hostel, Wastwater Youth Hostel. I don't know how many of you have used youth hostels recently. I haven't used one since I was in my teens, in the days when you would get told off for coming in late and you had all the duties to do, and they weren't particularly comfortable and so on. Youth hostels have changed, or had to change quite a lot since then. Tend to be a lot more comfortable. You can actually have food prepared for you, which we did most of the time. In fact, I think every night during the walk, we didn't cook for ourselves. We didn't self-cater. We got food either in the youth hostels or later on in the pubs and so on. So that was Wastwater, and it was a lovely setting, very peaceful, and we stayed there. You're also nowadays allowed alcohol in the youth hostels. They actually sell alcohol, so that was pleasant. In the evenings to sit. I seem to remember that at Wastwater there was actually, the dining room was actually a wooden panelled room, very attractive room. And we're all looking quite cheerful still. Beginning of the second day, we went back to this monument. As you can see, another monument sort of that noting the coast to coast. And I can't remember exactly who it's in honour of, and I can't read it there, but as you can see, we're all sort of raring to go on our second day, and it's not actually raining, but it's not very warm either, because we've got quite thick gear on, and gaiters and so on, and a bit of mud on my trousers already there at the front. I said I'd say about my clothing. I had borrowed that blue jacket, having been assured that it was waterproof. Well, I soon found out it wasn't waterproof. So I had to resort to using, you'll see later on, one of these, or several I got through, I think, sort of glorified big plastic bags over my blue jacket to keep out the worst of the rain on the days that it was raining. So you will see me later on with a sort of big flappy plastic bag, trying to keep the rain off that blue jacket, which I say was distinctly not waterproof. So there I am. I'm about the middle of that picture, walking with Chris, my old teacher tutor. We all had trekking poles, and I must say I found them, I hadn't really used them before. In fact, I'd rather poo-pooed them and thought that they were not really necessary, but I did find them very, very helpful on this walk. It does seem to help your walking. It's supposed to help your upper body strength, and that you channel more of your energy through from your upper body and not just using your legs to walk. Also extremely useful, the poles, when you're having to clamber across streams and so on, which you will probably see shortly. So day 2, pleasant, 12 miles, but not too strenuous. That's going along the edge of Wastwater, I think. And as you can see, they're a fairly gentle path, really. We're going gently down to the edge of the lake and then going the full length of the lake. And I don't think it was raining at that point, although it probably has been raining or had been raining. People have got their waterproof covers on their rucksacks. And that's where we spent the second night, at Ennerdale Youth Hostel. I have to say I have trouble remembering which youth hostel was which, so I can't remember too much about that. But that was, again, a stop in a youth hostel, and I'm sure we had a nice meal provided. Tend to be really nice, healthy meals like chili or spaghetti bolognese or a curry or something like that. So that was fine. And then the third day we set off walking. We went past another youth hostel. We didn't stay in this Blacksail camping barn, but it's a very well-known landmark actually in the Lake District for people walking. Sort of this area of the Lake District. So we just went past. I seem to remember we used the loos, but we walked past there. And then we had to start doing quite a bit of scrambling up towards Honister Pass. And as you can see, the water there was fairly full because it had been raining that day, but it had also been raining leading up to the walk. And you can see there why the poles are actually useful when you're crossing streams, because you can stick your pole in to try and help you from not stop you falling over. Whoever it is going up there on the left at the top with the green rucksack cover probably got told off, because Adrian and Tony were very insistent that we should use the same place, the same point to cross the stream as they had used, and they were there ready to help us. but you can see that was quite hairy, really, going across there. And then we had to go up towards the top, towards the left of what you can see there, and up and over Honister Pass. Yeah, so there we are, coming up towards Honister Pass. You can see a lot of slate in the ground as well. And there is a cafe and a slate museum at Honister. Also some very nice, I seem to remember, warm toilets with hand dryers, air hand dryers, which we used to warm our hands up because we were all getting pretty cold by the time we got up to the top of the Honister Pass. There we go, carrying on climbing. I'm not sure whether that was still going up Honister Pass, but you can see here the path very narrow, just a little ledge really, and you had to use chains. Adrian and Tony are holding on to chains there. You don't have to, but it was helpful to hold on to the chains there to stop you slithering down the, as you can see, very wet and slippery by that stage rock. So I'm pretty sure that day it rained on and off, hence people looking a bit damp anyway and having waterproof covers on their rucksacks. On the upside, it's, you know, beautiful scenery. You can see you're in the middle of the woods, and it's and the air's fresh, and everybody looks pretty cheerful, really. So that was a medium length day, 8.5 miles, and we ended up at Borrowdale Youth Hostel, where I thought this was lovely. They'd got some old walking boots had been converted into sort of flower or plant displays. I also remember there were red squirrels there. There were red squirrels hopping around the youth hostel. I think you can probably ignore the times on the bottom of some of these slides. I think perhaps at this stage I hadn't realised that my camera was set to a time zone, a different time zone from the UK time zone. I think I probably sorted it out later on, but so it may have been 13:37 when we got there, but I very much doubt it actually. Okay. Then the fourth day was again 9 miles, and it was a sunny day, certainly to start with, a really nice sunny day you can see there. So no jackets required, no waterproof covers required. Quite sort of sunny and hilly, but hilly, sort of up and down again, quite hilly. So that's again myself striding out. I think I managed to wear shorts nearly the whole time. I'm quite famous for wearing shorts in most weathers. And I had been to Australia that springtime, well, our spring, their autumn, so I'd actually got reasonably tanned whilst I was there, so I was determined to carry on with that. And Chris, my old teacher tutor, coming up behind me. This is sort of fairly typical of how you'd see us sort of walking in single file, following each other. There could have been hundreds of photos like this, and you can see people really using their poles there and really finding them helpful for pushing themselves up the slope. So I'm sure most of you know the Lake District. You know, it's no need to say how beautiful the scenery is, and that was beautiful scenery as we went up there. I decided, I was rather struck by this, that's me, my shadow. So that I thought that was an amusing photo to take of myself, or my shadow in one of the stops that we had. Unfortunately, somebody decided to take a photo of me taking the photo, which is not the most flattering photo I've ever seen of myself. But anyway, so there we go. That was me taking a photo. And that was the youth hostel that we stayed off on the fourth night, Grasmere Youth Hostel. So just remember, so lovely sunny day on the fourth day. And then we started the fifth day and it was dreadful. It was pouring with rain. We had to put on all our waterproof gear. You can just about see at the back that I've got my plastic bag over my non-waterproof blue jacket. And from what I remember, it rained the whole of that day. We were only doing 9.5 miles, well, only, but it rained and rained and rained. And there you go, you can see how damp it is, somewhat up and down.
Sorry, Nicki.
Even wetter. Yes.
It's Peter
Yeah.
here.
Yes.
Just to let you know, we've got another 3 minutes to go before we.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, I'll get to the end of this day probably. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
There you can see my plastic bag in its full glory. As we went across these stepping stones and how deep the water was. It wouldn't normally have been that deep, but you know, there was the aftermath of quite a lot of rain over the days. We got to sort of late morning. Adrian said, right, well, we'll just carry on down there and we'll stop and have some coffee, and then we'll carry on a bit further and then we'll stop and have some lunch. And I said, no, we won't. We'll just carry on and we'll get to the youth hostel and then we'll have the afternoon to dry out at the youth hostel, which is what we did. I've always been stroppy and I've got stroppier in my older age. So I think most people were happy with that. So we actually got to Patterdale Youth Hostel and we were able to take time to have the afternoon to dry out our clothes, actually do some washing. We used to pool all washing and run stuff through the washing machines in the youth hostels. And yeah, have time to dry out, just sit around. So we actually had our lunch and then our dinner at Patterdale Youth Hostel. I'll just start on the next day and then see how far we get. So the next day was the first pretty long day, 16.5 miles, heading on, sort of towards the edge of the Lake District. Again, very hilly, very beautiful. It involved going over this point of the walk, Kidsty Pike. I'm afraid I didn't check how high it was, but pretty high, and the wind on the top was just incredible. Hence, that is me looking gormless. Really, the only way to cope was to lie down. Otherwise, you'd have got blown away. A couple of years later, 2 girls did actually sort of get blown down Kidsty Pike. The chap on the left is a chap, he used to live in Leicester, and he's now living in the Lake District, and he joined us for some of the days. You can see he's quite big and strong, and he literally picked up one of the girls in our group, Jean, and more or less carried her back down Kidsty Pike because it was so windy and so wet, and it was dreadful. Going down Kidsty Pike, down towards a lake whose name I've forgotten, I have to say, but nice to get down out of the wind. And then the end of the walk is actually at Shap, and there's the ruins of Shap Abbey you can see in the distance. So it was lovely to see that at the end of the 16.5 miles that we did that day. And just to finish with, that was the bed and breakfast that we stayed at in Shap, an old farmhouse run by 2 brothers. That's actually, it was very, very good. And it was very nice to stay in, have proper bed with proper linen and proper comfort, well, relative comfort, and an ensuite toilet as well in the room that I managed to get. Okay, so we'd got to Ing Farm B&B, which was loved to have some comfort and proper sheets and nice. The 2 lads there cooked us very nice dinner and then a very nice cooked breakfast the next morning. So we set off then on our day 7, which was our first really long day. So that was our 20-mile day. And luckily, it was quite fine. So you can see Brian there. I told you the 70-plus-year-old striding out, looking fine. That's bits of limestone pavement as we're going. The gangly thing in blue at the back is me with 3 of the other sort of walkers. So it was a long day, 20 miles, but it wasn't too strenuous, and we were quite lucky with the weather that day, so that was pretty pleasant. There's only one other slide of that day, which we've got. Adrian, you can tell me what that viaduct is then.
Yeah, it's trying to think. It's not the Settle to Carlisle line, but it's one of the railway lines that joins up to the mines. In that hillside, there's the mines there. So yeah, I think it's just a standard
industrial
mine industrial one. Yeah.
Okay, right. Thanks. That was very helpful. Thank you, Adrian. Right, and that night we stayed in the Black Bull pub in Kirkby Stephen. Nothing else too momentous about that day. So then the following day, the weather was back dreadful again. And this was the day that we went to this 9 standards rig, which I mentioned at the beginning. So they're the 9 standards on the top of this really boggy area. And as I said, we'd gone up there, finding a path through this boggy landscape, but then, so it's the only time I've seen Tony absolutely flummoxed. He could not find us a way down. I think it was Adrian and Chris had to go round it, because by that stage, Chris, my ex-teacher tutor, had developed problems with her legs, heels, can't remember exactly. So Adrian nobly accompanied her round the bottom of the hill whilst we all went up this hill. And then eventually, having asked the local, were able to get down again. And then this is where you actually go into the county of North Yorkshire, as you can see there, and into the Yorkshire Dales. So having gone over 9 standards rig, that's Chris, I say my teacher tutor, who'd gone sort of along the flat rather than going over the hill. It was sunny for a bit then, and we got to, we were starting to follow the river in Swaledale, beautiful landscape again, beautiful scenery. And that night we stayed at, I mentioned this place called Keld Lodge. This was the next morning, I'm pretty sure, when we were setting off, by which time it was raining again. But Keld Lodge was very, very comfortable, very nice, very pleasant place to stay, really good dinner. I think the best meal that we had really probably for the whole of the trip. You can see though, you know, we were all already looking pretty wet, and sort of dirty trousers from previous days. It just wasn't worth cleaning your waterproof trousers, because you knew they were going to get all muddy and wet all over again. And I've got my plastic bag on to great effect. So we set off the next day. The chap on the left is a chap called Roger Cook, who's another LOROS stalwart. He's done a lot of volunteering and support for LOROS and a lot of walking. He's very heavily involved in the Leicestershire Footpaths Association, checking out the paths each year to make sure they're clear. And he joined us for a couple of days in the middle of the walk. He has now, and in the course of his walking with us, he actually completed the coast to coast, but he's done it not in sequential order, not in consecutive order. So he got a chunk in the middle of the coast to coast walk, which he hadn't yet done, and he did that with us, and we all had a suitable toast in little plastic cups to celebrate his having completed the coast to coast. He's a very strong walker, I must say. So that took us to Keld. So we set off from Keld, and the following day we were in the rain again, going to a place called Marrick. The good news was that on the way there was a coffee morning, a WI coffee morning. It's a place called Gunnerside. They happen to have their coffee mornings on Thursday, so I'm pretty sure that Adrian now always arranges the coast to coast to make sure that you're in Gunnerside on a Thursday to join the coffee morning. And that's not sure whether I'm offering cake to Brian or Brian's offering cake to me at the Gunnerside WI coffee morning. So that was very pleasant. And yeah, squeezing myself through a gap in the wall. The gaps are, I mean, I'm not that huge. Anybody with any sort of weight on them would not be able to get through these gaps in the walls in the Dales. They're very, very narrow. Anyway, so that was a fairly typical gap that as you go from field to field, and each of the fields, I don't think I've got a picture, but tends to have a beautiful stone barn in that they would have kept the sheep in and the feed for the sheep. So I don't know why I'm looking so worried, but perhaps I was worried about squeezing through the gap. I'm not totally sure. And then we stopped and had our lunch. Would usually Adrian and Tony are very good at making sure that we have breaks, so that during the morning, during the afternoon, every now and then they'll say, right, break time, make sure you drink some water or have a cup of tea or something with your flask. And then at lunchtime, you know, sit down and have a proper picnic. The funny incident from this one was that Jean was handing round wet wipes at the end of the meal, and we took a wet wipe and wiped our hands and everything. And then Roger Cook there, that you can see on the left, famously said, you mustn't flush it down the toilet. Well, we were about 1 million miles from any toilet at the time. It would have been very difficult to flush any wet wipes down any toilets, but that quote has gone down in history as a fairly meaningless quote. Okay, so then actually what happened was that we got to Reeth, which is where we were staying, and there just happens to be, there's a theme developing here, isn't there? There just happens to be a lovely ice cream parlour in Reeth. So we all had some lovely ice cream, but then actually we had to walk on from Reeth to a place called Marrick to make up the miles for that day, so that the miles overall would balance out well. So we got to Reeth. We were amazingly allowed to leave our bags in Reeth. Adrian normally insists that you carry your bags, day bags, this is, the whole time, but for once he was quite nice to us and he let us leave our bags in the front of the pub in Reeth. And so the last couple of miles from Reeth to Marrick, once we'd had our ice cream, we were allowed to walk with no kit, no day pack even, as we were walking. I mean, this is another joy of having the minibus and having our stuff transported from place to place, is that we only have to carry our day packs and we can leave our big bags, you know, in the minibus, and the minibus transports them to the place that we're staying. I think I would actually refuse to do any sort of trek nowadays carrying full pack. I did do it once in Japan and it was absolutely dreadful. I nearly died. So I would not agree ever again to carry full pack. Anyway, very nice ice cream. Can't remember what flavour I had, but I know it was delicious. The next day, quite a sunny day. I'm looking very worried again. I don't know why I'm looking so worried on the right there. Probably because Adrian was looking at me. This was the day that we went through Richmond, and this was the day that I was the navigator. Another really good thing that Adrian does is that each day he asks somebody to do the navigating, map reading, and somebody to be the front marker. So you always have somebody at the front of the group and somebody to be the back marker, so that you have somebody at the back to make sure that nobody gets left behind. So this was my day to be perhaps that's why I'm looking worried, because I was worried about reading the map and being the navigator for the day. But this was as we were approaching Richmond, and you can see the weather was quite fine for a while. And we had a nice time in Richmond. I think we had time to have a cup of tea and a bit of a wander around and a bit of a shop. And then we carried on from Richmond to Bolton on Swale. A couple of you have got your, you're not muted.
Yeah, I've got that covered too, but anyway.
Okay, okay. And then this is where we stayed that night, in a pub whose name I've forgotten, Adrian?
Black Bull, I think.
Hang on.
King's Arms would have been.
King's Arms at Reeth, that's right. We stayed the 2 nights at King's Arms. And I rather like this photo of us all trying to get our boots dry for the next day's dreadful weather. So yeah, and this is, as I mentioned, this is where we actually stayed 2 nights, which was made really nice not to have to pack the bags in the morning when we moved on the following day. So this next day was a fairly long day again, back to 17 miles, but fairly flat actually. Some people said they thought it was a boring day because it was fairly flat and not many features. But I mean, one lovely thing about this walk is that the landscape is very varied and you get different sorts of scenery most days from the previous day. And it was really quite nice to walk on the flat for a bit rather than going clambering up and down as we've been doing most of the time. It was, yeah, as you can see, sort of fairly sunny for a change and fairly pleasant. This was the day that poor Sue tried walking again, but developed or redeveloped blisters and realised that she really wasn't going to be able to walk for the rest of the time. Nice lunch stop, a place called Danby Wiske, which I think is a really hilarious name, sounds like some sort of kitchen implement. And they do have a sign on their pub actually saying how far you've still got to go to the end of the coast to coast. So from there it was just 60 miles to Robin Hood's Bay, where we will be finishing the coast to coast. So I thought it was a very pleasant day actually, even though it was sort of flat and say not particularly attractive landscape, but it was, variety is the spice of life and all that. Adrian, what's it called? I can't remember what that area is called.
It's the Vale of Mowbray.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, the Vale of Mowbray.
Very flat.
Yes, very, very flat. Yeah, but I say it made, you know, a nice change actually. So now we're on to the following day, because we'd stayed another night in Reeth. We'd been ferried back to Reeth in the minibus, and then we set off on the next day, just 12 miles to Claybank Top. So we'd had Danby, Wiske, and then this day you get a hill whose name has just gone out of my head, but which is equally funny to me. Oh, Adrian. Anyway, and also this day, some of the path actually follows the route of the Cleveland Way. So it intersects with the Cleveland Rosebery Topping. You go past a hill called Rosebery Topping. So having had Danby Wiske, I'm sure you whisk up some Rosebery Topping with your Danby Wiske. So past Rosebery Topping, you can see again the walk, fairly easy walking, really fairly flat for quite a bit of it. Although then you do get some up and down, up to some big stones, the way stones, as part of this part of the Cleveland Way that day. And subsequently, we have actually done the Cleveland Way as another of the. Perhaps I didn't mention it because it was to me so obvious. But this was a fundraising trek, so we all paid in full for our own travel and accommodation and meals and so on. And then we had to fundraise a certain amount of money. And Adrian will tell you at the end, I'm sure, the sort of monies that have been raised over the years for this, in pounds, tens of thousands of pounds, certainly, that's been raised.
Hundreds, yeah. Hundreds.
Yeah, of thousands of pounds, not hundreds, hundreds. Yeah. That was a very, and I must say, by this stage, you know, you're day 12 into a 15-day or so walk, and you're just totally in the zone. You feel like this is life, this is your world, this is how, and you can't imagine actually not walking every day, and you can't imagine life after, or what it was like before, or it was a bit like lockdown really, or what life's going to be like afterwards. You're just totally in the zone and just keeping going. And most of us, I think, you know, incredibly fit by this stage, not finding any difficulty really in walking these 12 miles that day. So there was some clambering up and down, but the path's fairly easy to follow. Quite hard underfoot when you've got these paths which are slabs, which are stones there. But you can see that's the sort of, there was some undulating to do, but not so difficult. You did not like clambering in the Lake District where you have to pick out your own steps much more. Somebody's at my front door. Hang on. Carry on, Adrian.
Okay.
Right. Just the postman. He's been and gone. Right. Okay. He knocks when he's got anything. Right. Then the next day was a very, very wet day again. As you can see from the gear that we're wearing and the waterproof covers on the rucksacks, and I've got my plastic bag hate wearing. So incredibly wet. And this was a 20-mile day. This was the second 20-mile day. And it was by far the most awful day of the whole thing, not just from a weather point of view, but having just said that you were totally in the zone and you were totally cheerful, and it was so hard. It was really so hard. We went across moors, we went across this flipping grouse moor, and all these grouse shooter beater people turned up at one stage. It was so windy that you could not even hear, you couldn't even talk to anybody because you couldn't hear anybody. You couldn't do, apart from having earphones in. It was just absolutely dreadful. And it was very, very cold. And we stopped in a pub for lunch, and I went to the toilet, and I hadn't by that stage been able to fish my gloves out of my bag, because I knew if I started footling around in my bag I'd get even wetter. So my hands had been getting very cold during the morning with walking, and when I went to the toilet, I could not undo the button on my trousers. I could not get my trousers undone. I had to ask this lady who came in to undo my trousers for me. I was so cold and so miserable. And I think if Paul, one of the group, hadn't bought me a nourishing warm bowl of soup, despite what I just said about, you know, being in the zone, I think I would have just given up at that stage. It was the most dreadful day, absolutely dreadful. Anything to add, Adrian, for that?
Yeah, it was a very cold day, but I mean, the beauty about it is you end up coming to the line in at Blakey Ridge, yeah. And it's lovely, a lovely hot fire on the go, so you can sort of warm yourself up.
Yeah.
The trouble is trying to come out of the pub after lunch. That is the difficulty.
Yeah. Yeah. You can see how cheerful we were. It was absolutely dreadful. Just absolutely dreadful. I think that was the day as well where in the afternoon, once we've been in this pub, Tony said, well, we can either carry on, you know, more of the same this afternoon, or we can go down the road. And we said, we'll go down the road, thank you very much. And we followed the road. And when we got to the end of the walk, when we joined up with the minibus again, he pointed to this torrent at the side of the road, and he said that was the path. That's the path that you would have been walking if you decided to follow the path for the afternoon rather than go down the road. So, I mean, you can see we were all absolutely drenched and freezing cold and miserable. And this is when I've told you, Brian, who was this inveterate walker and runner and so on, but it turned out that his kit was just not waterproof. He got really, really cold and wet, and in fact was really threatening with hypothermia. And the chaps told him to strip off in the minibus and get something warm on, because he was just cold and wet and threatening to keel over with hypothermia. This is the following day, I think I'm right in saying.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. That was a ford that we were supposed to walk across. So then we thought, well, we got the minibus to come and join us. So we thought we could all get in the minibus and be driven across the ford. But as we stood there, the water, you could literally see the water going up that pole, sort of up to 2 foot, 3 foot, whatever. And so it wasn't even safe to go across in the minibus. So we had to, we all piled in the minibus nevertheless, and then did something like an 8-mile detour to go round and be dropped at the other side of the ford. But it just wasn't safe even to drive the minibus through, never mind actually to try and walk through it. As you can see, you probably have been swept away. There were a couple of other walkers around, and we just said, oh, do you want to get in our minibus? I remember I had this girl sitting on my lap as we went round, because we were, you know, every seat was taken in the minibus anyway, and then we took these two with us round to the other side of the ford. Yeah, that's the sort of, perhaps I'm mixing up days, perhaps that was the torrent that would have been the path.
Yeah.
That we could have chosen. Yes, that's right, sorry, getting my days mixed up. Anyway, the good news was that was the last horrible day. Well, it was the last full day anyway, and it was the last dreadful day. And so we got back to Whitby, where we stayed in a very nice B&B. I think Adrian uses the youth hostel in Whitby nowadays, but we stayed in this B&B. The only thing was the B&B, very, very nice people, very accommodating, but they were not, it wasn't a walker's place. They weren't geared up to 15 people turning up with totally wet kit and needing to dry out, wash and stuff and dry out all our kit. And they did give us big black bin liners to put all the wet stuff in. But there were some shots, which I haven't included, of people stuffing hair dryers into their boots and trying to get the boots dry by actually just blasting the hair dryers into the boots. And on the final night, so then we had our final evening out. Of course, if you're in Whitby, you have to go to the fish and chip place, the Magpie. So we all went and had our meal at the Magpie, and Adrian organised a sort of awards evening. So people get awards for the most, you know, ridiculous things, like least waterproof jacket, or most spectacular fall, or most grumpy person in the group, and these sort of things. So we had, which of course I didn't win. Anyway, again, an example of Adrian's absolutely immaculate organisation. I just don't know how he does it and how he keeps his cool and keeps his patience. But yeah, a great meal at the Magpie. And then the following day, oh, sorry, that was just the end of that, the wet day again. Looking very fetching there on the right, I hope you'll agree. Right, final day. So we set off in sunshine, hurrah, to do the final 5 miles into Robin Hood's Bay. And everybody was smiling again by that stage. I got my legs out again to finish the walk. And we just thought that this sign was quite a good one to pose behind as we set off. And it's fairly, just a short stretch, I think, across the caravan site, I seem to remember, to the coast. And then you follow the coastal path along to Robbie, and there is Robin Hood's Bay, which I'm sure many of you will have visited on holiday, a lovely little place. And that's the official end of the coast to coast walk. And if you remember, we had to wet our boots and pick up a pebble as we set off at Bees Head. So this is the other end. You have to wet your boots at the other end, and you have to throw your pebble into the water to show that you've carried it the 192 miles across. And then just for a change, you all go to the pub, and that's the sort of archetypal photo really of everybody in front of the sign that marks the end of the 192 miles. There's a book that you can sign in the pub as well to say that you've done the coast to coast. Jean there with the dark glasses had very kindly provided some proper champagne, so we were all drinking actually proper champagne. And as I say, we all made it in one way or the other. Poor Sue had to make it as the driver's mate, but she did actually make it. And we all, there've been years when people haven't made it, people have broken their ankle or hurt their ankle or their sort of some part of their anatomy, but our year everybody did make it despite the dreadful weather. And that's me with my legs out on the 26th of September 2012 at the end of my 192 miles. So Peter, if you want to get us back all together, I'm happy, and I'm sure Adrian as well, to answer questions. Adrian might want to say a few words about how it started. I did allude to it, and about the amount of money that you've managed to raise over the years and any other walks. Okay, Peter, okay? Oh, stop share. Do I do that? Do you do that?
Thank you very much, Nikki. That was great. And there's about 3 or 4 people who've said that they've done this walk.
Oh right.
Somebody asked if you would have liked to have done it the other way round, so you have the flat bit first.
No, I don't think so. To be honest, I think no, I think it's good to get the hills, the mountains sort of out of the way first. I also thought, as with a couple of other walks we've done, you know that the Lake District is going to be beautiful and going to be scenic. So that's, you know, that sort of goes without saying. But then actually I found the second half, perhaps because I was in the zone and fitter and all that sort of thing, but I found the second half almost more attractive because it's more varied, and the dales were lovely, and then the moors were sort of very rugged and so on. So I actually thought I felt like I was moving from the familiar to the less familiar. But Adrian will be able to tell you, one year they did do coast to coast to coast. So they did from west to east, and then they went back again, mad. So he can tell you what it's like going the other way.
Yeah, do you want me to just explain about that? Yeah. I'd got a group of people who said, we'd love to do sort of both ways. And I thought they were mad at the time. And there were actually 6 of them in all. So I said, well, actually, if we did a trip going one way and then another trip going the other way, they could actually take part in both of them. And that just did seem to work. So I had one group of people started off and did it from the west to the east. And again, they really enjoyed doing that. Then literally they turned around, another group came and joined them, so that straight away that afternoon they were starting the walk back, going the other direction. I could only, because I worked for LOROS, I could only spend 3 weeks total. So I had to go back because we were organising our sponsored walk down in Leicester. So I ended up doing 2 weeks going from west to east, which is generally the most difficult part. Then I missed the first section and then did the Lake District section again, which is awkward. Personally, I think like Nikki was saying, it's probably better to do it from west to east because you have the prevailing winds, but also the fact that actually, I think, the Lake District is challenging, but you haven't got the distances, whereas actually as you get fitter, you can get the long distances, and actually it's, whilst people say it's boring, it's, as Nikki was saying, it's actually, you know, the whole of the countryside right way across is just brilliant. And a lot of it is a bit like the Leicestershire walking when you sort of get to the Vale of Mowbray and that sort of area. But actually Leicestershire is gorgeous for walking as well. So yeah. So I personally, I still think west to east is the best one. It also helps from accommodation point of view as well, because quite often if you delay because most people would travel up and go from a Saturday and then perhaps do 2 weeks. But if you delay it one day, they've already moved on to the next section. So that's my little trick that I tend to use when I book. So I would tend to go from perhaps a Sunday or a Monday, and therefore most people have moved on from one lot of accommodation. It makes it a bit easier for me.
Okay, thanks for that. I asked a question about the problem with the non-waterproof clothing, and somebody recommended Paramo. I've never heard of that, and is good. But then Frank has commented that some 20 years ago, some friends and he walked in the Lake District, terrible weather, torrential rain, hail, and he was wearing a cheap, long, thin, waterproof nylon mat from the famous Army and Navy stores. All the others had expensive, posh breathables, Berghaus, etc. And he was the one that kept dry. So,
I have
anyway.
since then bought a Berghaus jacket. I mean, it's probably the most I've ever spent on any clothing, apart from running shoes. And I have to say, it's not that good, and the zip's gone after not that long. I have to fiddle around with the zip, so sort of zip it down and then up again and then down again. It's not. I'm not totally impressed, I must say, with the Berghaus thing. I didn't mention, by the way, that very, very, very wet day. So another thing was that in the pub, we sort of dug around for your packed lunch, and my lunch was in a plastic bag in my rucksack, in a bin liner, in a liner of the rucksack, and the waterproof cover was over the rucksack. So it was within 4 layers of waterproof protection, but my lunch was still wet. Just absolutely dreadful.
Oh gosh, that's worse than sand when you're on the beach, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll just comment actually on some of the clothing. I think the biggest problem, you do need something that's very breathable, and that's why a Paramo is very good, but obviously ever so expensive for when you're buying those sorts of ones. And again, Berghaus and all the others are good, but at the end of the day, if you're going to have a deluge of rain, it's going to get in no matter what, unless you're wearing a plastic bag. And even then you've got to seal it properly. And the trouble is, I find actually it's very uncomfortable if things aren't breathable, because of the fact that actually you sweat just as much inside as you've got wet outside. So I prefer something that's very breathable. And actually most of the time, if it's only light rain, I won't even wear any waterproofs, because actually I find it's actually worse for me than it is wearing any form of waterproofs. Perhaps even just
Sorry, Adrian. I tried to explain a bit about how the whole thing started, but you might want to give a bit more of a. I did say you were in a pub for just exceptionally, but
yeah. As usual, most of my sort of bad decisions, or perhaps even good decisions, are made when I've got a pint in my hand and I'm standing at a bar. But it's generally, well, in fact, what happened was I had a guy called Fred Parrott, who wanted to do coast to coast, and he was going to do it on his own. And he came in to see me, and we talked it through. And I wasn't too happy about him doing it on his own. I wanted him to perhaps at least have somebody else to support him. As it happened, foot and mouth hit at the time when he was due to go, so he had to suspend everything for a year. So it gave us time to actually put together a team to go and do the walk. I put them through all the training, got them all ready, got all the maps and everything else, and they went off and did the walk. Came back, we did a presentation in the pub, and just as an offhand comment, I said, "Oh, I quite fancy doing that myself." So I didn't have any choice, and as a result of that I took my first group in 2003, another one in 2005. 7, 8, and then I've done about 14, 15 trips, I think, in all. The problem is people like Nicki and co come back and say, well, yeah, we'd love doing coast to coast, but what's next? So before you know it, you're having to organise Hadrian's Wall. We've done Cleveland Way, West Highland Way, Pembroke Coastal Walk. We did the Cotswolds Way. I can't think what other ones are, but there's loads of different walks.
Dales Way.
Oh yeah, Dales Way as well. But yeah, there's some lovely walks out there, and actually the countryside is actually better, I think, in the UK as an overall walk than you'll get anywhere in the world. We have people that come and do coast to coast from New Zealand, Australia, and all over. One year we came across a couple that were totally lost from Hawaii. And I'm thinking, why would you come from Hawaii to come? We go on holiday to Hawaii. Why would you want to sort of come and walk in the UK? And they said, well, actually, no matter where they go, you just can't get that variety of walks like you can get in the UK. And I thought, that's great. Funny enough, we then bumped it. Well, they then said they were going to come back the following year. So we were emailing backwards and forwards, and we managed to actually join them just for about half a day on their trip the following year, which was really nice to sort of catch up with them.
So a bit about fundraising, Adrian.
Yeah, okay. Fundraising, generally the costs for taking part in this, we just do it purely a straightforward cost. So if whatever it costs for the B&Bs, whatever it costs for going into the youth hostels and so on. The minibus costs, I get LOROS to pay for the minibus itself, but then we just have to spread the costs of things like the fuel and so on. So I do that as an even cost right across the board. I pay for my own way as well. And the same with all the other guides and drivers. So basically it's just like a voluntary one. So unlike these trips that are organised by travel companies and so on, obviously they can be quite expensive, whereas actually this one, it's probably costing about 400 to probably £400 to £500 for the fortnight, which includes all your food, all your accommodation, all the travel and so on. And everything's all in. Which I think is very, very reasonable. But then I asked people to then pledge to raise a minimum of £1,000 for LOROS, and that can be done by all sorts. So that can be just getting sponsorship. Some people will do bucket collections at various places, and that's quite surprising. You do a bucket collection in a supermarket, you can probably sort of raise £200, straight away from something like that. And generally, most people, though they aim at 1,000, will end up with a lot more than that. I know there's been several people who've raised probably £4,000 or £5,000 at a time, and generally as a group we'll be raising between £10,000 to £15,000. So from LOROS's point of view, it's very worthwhile doing, and from my point of view, it's good because I do the training walks and get people out about walking, but also everybody seems to really enjoy it.